When Achen married Omari, a quiet widower from the green hills of Mabera, she didn't expect a fairy tale, but she also didn't expect the cold stares of 3 children who barely looked her in the eye. On their wedding day, the eldest daughter whispered to her younger siblings, "She's not our mother." And those 5 words clung to Achen's heart like thorns. But she didn't let the pain show. She just smiled gently, even as they stood at a distance, refusing to take a family photo with her. Achen had come with nothing but a hopeful heart and a small bag of clothes, ready to build a new home with love, patience, and kindness. She had no children of her own, but in her heart, she was ready to be a mother to these ones. She didn't ask for much, just a chance. But the children saw her as a stranger, someone trying to replace the mother they had lost. That night, while the guests laughed and danced, Achen stood at the edge of the room, watching her new family from afar. She whispered to herself, "One day they'll know I came with love." But deep down she feared they never would. Achen gave those children everything she had, even when they gave her nothing in return. From the moment she entered that home, she treated them like her own. She woke up before the sun, packed their school bags, braided the girls' hair with trembling but loving hands, and walked the youngest to class each morning, rain or shine. When one of them had a fever in the middle of the night, it was Achen who stayed up, pressing a cool cloth to their forehead and whispering prayers through tears. She sold her earrings once just to buy medicine. She stitched their school uniforms by hand, sometimes using old curtains or her own dresses for fabric. She skipped meals so they could eat more. She washed their clothes by hand until her fingers cracked. And when their aunt insulted them or threatened to slap them, it was Achen who stood in the way, shielding them like a lioness. She took every insult quietly, every cold glance, every door slammed in her face. Still, they never called her mama, just the new wife. Sometimes when they thought she couldn't hear, they would whisper about her, saying she was pretending, saying she could never replace their mother. And even though her heart broke a little more each time, Achen kept showing up, kept cooking, kept giving, kept loving. Love without blood. It's the kind that costs the most because it's not guaranteed in return. But Achen never gave love because it was easy. She gave it because she believed that someday they might see her heart. That maybe, just maybe, love could still grow in a house built on grief. But some nights, when the house was quiet and Omari was already asleep, Achen sat alone on the back step with her hands in her lap, asking herself softly, "Is love ever enough when no one sees it?" Achen gave those children everything she had, even when they gave her nothing in return. From the moment she entered that home, she treated them like her own. She woke up before the sun, packed their school bags, braided the girls' hair with trembling but loving hands, and walked the youngest to class each morning, rain or shine. When one of them had a fever in the middle of the night, it was Achen who stayed up, pressing a cool cloth to their forehead and whispering prayers through tears. She sold her earrings once just to buy medicine. She stitched their school uniforms by hand, sometimes using old curtains or her own dresses for fabric. She skipped meals so they could eat more. She washed their clothes by hand until her fingers cracked. And when their aunt insulted them or threatened to slap them, it was Achen who stood in the way, shielding them like a lioness. She took every insult quietly, every cold glance, every door slammed in her face. Still, they never called her mama, just the new wife. Sometimes when they thought she couldn't hear, they would whisper about her, saying she was pretending, saying she could never replace their mother. And even though her heart broke a little more each time, Achen kept showing up, kept cooking, kept giving, kept loving. Love without blood. It's the kind that costs the most because it's not guaranteed in return. But Achen never gave love because it was easy. She gave it because she believed that someday they might see her heart. That maybe, just maybe, love could still grow in a house built on grief. But some nights, when the house was quiet and Omari was already asleep, Achen sat alone on the back step with her hands in her lap, asking herself softly, "Is love ever enough when no one sees it?" Achen had never asked for much. But this year, for her birthday, she quietly hoped things might be different. She didn't expect gifts or loud surprises, just a little love, a small happy birthday, maybe even a hug. She had saved a little money from selling vegetables and bought a small cake from the roadside bakery. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, put up decorations with her own hands, and cooked everyone's favorite meals, pilau, stew, and even sweet mandatsi. She smiled as she moved around the kitchen, heart full of hope. But as the day went on, no one said a word. The children came home from school, walked past the balloons without asking. Omari walked in, tired from work, kissed her forehead but said nothing about her special day. They all ate the food she had prepared, laughed about their own stories, and not one person asked why there was a cake sitting on the sideboard. She waited the whole day for someone to notice. Just one word. Just one moment. But it never came. When everyone had gone to bed, Achen quietly lit one candle on the cake, whispered, "Happy birthday to me," and blew it out all alone. Then she went outside to do the laundry she had postponed from earlier. The night was cold, and her hands shook as she scrubbed shirts by the basin. Tears mixed with the soap water as she whispered, "Maybe one day they'll see me. Maybe one day someone will remember." She wasn't angry, just deeply, painfully forgotten. And that kind of sadness doesn't shout. It just sits with you, heavy in your chest. Achen wiped her tears, folded the clean clothes neatly, and walked back inside. Another birthday had passed. Another year of giving without receiving. But still she loved them. Still she stayed. Because even though they didn't see her that day, her heart refused to stop hoping for the day they finally would. It was supposed to be a simple visit to the village. Just a weekend trip to see Omari's cousin, and let the children spend time with their roots. But that Sunday afternoon turned into something Achen would never forget. Liona, the youngest child, had been playing under the mango tree when she suddenly collapsed, gasping for air. Her tiny chest heaved, her eyes wide with panic. She couldn't breathe. Achen's heart nearly stopped. She screamed for help, but there was no car, no boda nearby, and the nearest clinic was over 3 miles away. Without thinking twice, Achen scooped Liona into her arms and started running. The rough village path was full of sharp stones, and she had no time to wear her slippers. Her bare feet bled with every step, but she didn't stop. Liona's wheezing grew louder, and Achen whispered prayers between sobs. "Please God, not this child. Not like this." When she finally reached the clinic, her dress was soaked with sweat and blood, and Liona was barely conscious. The doctor rushed her in. Minutes later he came out and said, "You brought her just in time. A few more minutes and we would have lost her." Achen collapsed onto the bench outside, trembling with exhaustion. Her legs ached, her feet swollen and cut open, but all she could think was, she's alive. She stayed overnight by Liona's bedside, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, singing softly like a mother would. When Omari and the other children arrived the next morning, Liona was already recovering. They looked at Achen sitting in the corner, bandaged feet, tired eyes, and said nothing. No one asked how she managed. No one said, "Thank you." They took Liona home and left Achen behind to collect herself. She never brought it up again. Never asked for praise. But that night, while soaking her wounded feet in salt water, Achen whispered to herself, "If love means saving them, even if they never see it, then I will keep loving." Omari's retirement party was the talk of Mabera. The children planned it like a grand celebration. A full feast, music, speeches, and guests from near and far. They sent out beautiful invitations, called uncles, aunties, even former workmates. But somehow, the one person who had stood by Omari through every storm, Achen, was left out. She never saw an invitation. No one asked her to help. No one even told her what time it would start. Still, on the day of the party, Achen woke up early, cleaned the compound, helped the caterers arrange the chairs, and even prepared extra soup for the guests. She wore her best dress, a deep blue one Omari had once said looked beautiful on her. She tied her head wrap neatly, added some perfume, and stood by the kitchen, smiling, waiting for someone to say, "Mama, come sit with us." But no one did. The music played, speeches flowed, and Omari sat proudly at the center, his children surrounding him. People clapped, laughed, shared memories. But no one mentioned Achen. Not even once. A guest asked, "Isn't that his wife over there?" One of the children simply replied, "She just helped raise us." Achen stood quietly, holding a serving spoon, pretending to be busy. Her eyes followed every hug, every photo, every cheer. None of it included her. Not even a glance from the man she had given her life to. The same man she had prayed for, served, stood by. She sat at the back with the cooks, eating in silence. Even they looked at her with sympathy. Inside, her heart felt like it was crumbling. But her face stayed calm. That night, after everyone had gone home, She cleaned up the mess, packed the leftovers and swept the floor. Then she sat alone on the empty porch whispering to herself, I was there. I gave my all but still I was invisible. And in that silence, a seed of goodbye began to grow in her heart. The party was in full swing. Music echoed through the compound. The smell of roasted goat and jollof rice filled the air, and guests moved around in bright, beautiful clothes. Everyone had come to celebrate Omari's retirement, a man praised for his years of service, his wisdom and his strength. People stood up to speak about him, raise glasses and offer blessings. But in all the noise and celebration, no one noticed the woman sitting quietly at the back, the woman who had stood by him every single day. Achen sat with the cooks under a small canopy, her plate of food resting on her lap. She wore her finest wrapper and matching blouse, had even applied a little powder and lip balm, hoping this time might be different. She had imagined herself sitting beside Omari, holding his hand, smiling as someone said, "This woman stood by him." But that moment never came. At one point a curious guest, confused by her quiet presence, asked, "Isn't that Omari's wife?" The question hung in the air, waiting for the dignity it deserved. But one of the children, without even looking her way, replied coldly, "She just helped raise us. Just helped." As if years of sacrifice, tears, prayers, and silent love meant nothing. As if she was a maid, not a mother, not a wife. Achen felt those words like a slap. She didn't cry, not in front of the cooks. She simply looked down at her food, forcing each bite down like stones. Every laugh from the main table felt like another reminder that she didn't belong there. That no matter how much she had given, her seat at the real table would always be denied. She watched them, the family she had poured herself into, and realized they still saw her as an outsider. Not because she hadn't loved enough, but because they never truly opened their hearts. And that night, while washing dishes behind the house, her heart whispered something she had been afraid to admit. Maybe love is not enough when the ones you love refuse to see you. That night, after the party, the house was quiet again. Empty plates were stacked in the kitchen, the lights in the living room still flickered, and laughter from earlier hung in the air like smoke. Achen walked slowly to the bedroom, her heart heavy, her eyes dry. Not because there were no tears left, but because she'd cried too many times already. She sat on the edge of the bed, looked around at the home she had once dreamed would be filled with love, and realized something deep in her soul. She couldn't do this anymore. She opened the old wooden trunk at the end of the bed and began folding her few clothes. Simple dresses, 2 wrappers, and a scarf Omari had given her long ago. Then with trembling hands she took down the photo frames from the shelf, baby pictures of the children she had fed, bathed, protected. She cleaned the glass gently, wrapped them in cloth and placed them back in the trunk. Not out of anger but out of love. Because even though they never called her Mama, in her heart they were her children. Then she sat at the small table and wrote a letter. Just one line. Simple. Honest. Full of everything she'd carried for years. I loved them like mine. But love shouldn't feel this lonely. She left it on Omari's pillow, where he'd be sure to find it. Not to hurt him, but to help him see the truth he had ignored for too long. She placed her bag by the door, took one last look around the house and walked out quietly. No shouting. No drama. Just silence. The stars were bright above Mabera Hills that night, and the breeze felt colder than usual. Achen didn't know where she would go, but she knew she couldn't stay in a house where love was always one-sided, where she had given everything and remained unseen. As she walked down the path barefoot and alone, her heart finally felt something it hadn't in years: peace. Painful, yes, but peaceful. 5 years passed like a quiet storm. After Achen left, the house slowly lost its warmth. The laughter faded, the meals became basic, and no one bothered to water the flowers she had once planted by the front door. Omari, once a strong and proud man, began to grow weaker. His hair turned whiter, his hands trembled more, and his voice lost its strength. The children had all moved to different cities, chasing jobs, promotions, new lives. They called sometimes, sent money now and then, but the house in Mabera felt emptier with each passing year. No one talked about her. Not once. Her name was never spoken aloud, like it was a shadow they were all trying to forget. But her presence lingered in every corner. The curtains she sewed were still hanging. The spice jars were still labeled in her handwriting. And on some mornings when the wind blew a certain way, Omari thought he could smell her perfume in the hallway. Every now and then, one of the children would come home briefly. They'd open the cupboards and say, "Remember when Mama Achen used to make chapati?" But no one said it too loud. And no one ever admitted that they missed her. Still, when they tasted food from the new househelp, they always frowned and said, "It's not like before." Omari spent more and more time sitting on the veranda alone, wrapped in a shawl staring at the hills. He often held the letter she left, folded and worn at the edges. Sometimes he whispered her name when no one was around. He never told the children that he regretted not standing up for her. But the way he looked at her photo told the story. The home had everything. A television, furniture, and even new paint on the walls. But it didn't have her. And without her it was just a house. Not a home. Not anymore. The funeral in Magoro town was crowded. People had gathered from different villages to mourn an elder. And the heat of the afternoon sun mixed with quiet murmurs and the sound of sobbing. The eldest son of Omari had come to represent the family, dressed in a crisp black shirt and dark sunglasses. He stood near the tent, shaking hands, offering nods, trying to be polite, but his heart wasn't fully there. Then, while reaching for a cup of water, his eyes caught someone he hadn't seen in years. She was standing by the shelter's table, handing out cups of water with quiet grace. Her back was straight, her movements calm, and there was a light in her eyes that he didn't remember before. His heart paused. It was her. Achen. For a moment he just stared. She looked different. Older, yes. But not tired, stronger. More at peace. There was something about her that seemed almost unshakable. She wore a simple dress and a soft scarf around her head. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. Yet, in that moment she stood out more than anyone else at the funeral. She hadn't seen him yet. She was too busy helping a crying child to the side, wiping their tears with the edge of her wrapper, then returning to pass another bottle of water to an elderly woman. She was smiling gently, the same smile he used to ignore when she packed his lunch or waited up at night when he stayed out late. And for the first time in years, he felt a deep shame rise in his chest. The woman he once called just the new wife was here, serving strangers with more love than he had ever shown her. He wanted to walk over to say something, anything, but the words got stuck. So he just stood there watching her, wondering how he had spent so many years pretending she didn't matter, only to realize now in this quiet, sacred moment, just how deeply she always had. The day Omari was laid to rest, the house in Mabera was full again, but this time with silence heavier than grief. His children had returned from the cities, dressed in black, sitting side by side in the living room. No one spoke much. There was tension in the air, like something unsaid was waiting to explode. They were all thinking about the will, the one their father had written quietly, without their knowledge. Later that afternoon the lawyer arrived, carrying a brown envelope. He sat down, cleared his throat and began reading. At first it was the usual. Land documents, a bank account, and a few personal belongings. But then came the part that stopped every breath in the room. "To my wife, Achen," the lawyer read, "who gave me peace and silence and love in return for nothing. I leave everything." The room went still. One of the daughters shifted in her seat. The eldest son clenched his jaw. No one looked at each other. Everything. To her? The words echoed in their minds, louder than any argument they had ever had. She gave me love in return for nothing. That line hit the hardest, because deep down they all knew it was true. She had cooked their meals, stayed up when they were sick, protected them, prayed for them, and stood quietly beside a man who rarely stood up for her. And still, they had treated her like a stranger, called her the new wife, left her out, left her behind. Now the truth was written in black and white. Their father had seen it all. He may have been silent, but he was not blind. And in his final words, he gave Achen what she had never asked for, recognition. None of them said a word as the lawyer folded the will and stood up to leave. The shame sat heavy on their shoulders. They had spent years ignoring the woman who gave them a mother's love, and now the man who raised them had made sure the world would never forget her name. One by one they came. Not together, they couldn't face her as a group. It was too hard, too shameful. So each child came alone days after the will was read, hearts full of guilt, eyes heavy with memories they had tried to bury. They found Achen at the women's shelter, where she now lived and worked. She didn't hide. She didn't run. She met each of them with the same calm, quiet strength she'd always had. The eldest son came first. He stood at the doorway for a long time, watching her help a young girl wash her hands. When she finally noticed him, he looked down, unable to meet her eyes. "Mama," he said softly, voice shaking. "I'm sorry. For everything. I was wrong." Achen didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply looked at him with tired eyes and said, "Now you remember I was Mama?" He nodded, ashamed, and she reached out and touched his shoulder, just once, before walking away to continue her work. The second came 2 days later. The daughter who had once called her a stranger now knelt before her with tears in her eyes. "I didn't understand. I was young. But you loved us anyway. I see it now." Achen helped her stand but didn't hug her. "I waited for years," she said quietly. "You only saw me when I was gone." The youngest came last. Liona, the one she carried barefoot to the clinic. Her eyes were red before she even spoke. "Mama, I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I never forgot what you did. I just didn't know how to say thank you. I'm sorry." This time, Achen looked at her for a long time. Then she sighed deep and slow. "You were a child. The adults should have taught you better." None of them expected her to welcome them with open arms. And she didn't. But she also didn't shut the door. Her heart was still healing but not closed. She had waited so long to be seen. And finally they were starting to open their eyes. Achen didn't believe in easy forgiveness. Love wasn't something you just picked up again after breaking it for years. So when the children came to her, hoping to rebuild what they had lost, she looked at them calmly and said, "This is not about the inheritance. I don't need your visits because of land or money. If you want my heart again, you'll have to earn it." They stood there surprised. No one had expected her to say that. Then she told them her condition, simple yet hard. "Come work with me at the shelter. 6 months. No special treatment. No shortcuts. Just hard work. If you want to understand me, walk in my shoes." At first they didn't know what to say. Clean toilets? Wash clothes? Feed children who weren't theirs? They had careers, titles, lives in the city. But Achen looked at them with steady eyes and added, "I gave you my life, my love, my strength. Now I ask for your time. If that's too much, don't come back." And so, slowly they began. The eldest son came first. He swept floors and fixed broken windows. The daughter followed, helping cook porridge and braid girls' hair. Even Liona came, reading bedtime stories to children who had no parents. It wasn't easy. The shelter was noisy, tiring, and full of pain. But it was also full of healing and truth. They watched Achen move through the halls like light, hugging crying mothers, singing softly to babies, and laughing with the kind of joy that came from purpose, not applause. And as the days passed, something inside them began to change. They weren't there to impress her. They were there to understand her. And for the first time they saw what kind of woman she truly was. Not the new wife, but a mother in every way that mattered. She didn't praise them. She didn't pat their backs. She simply watched. And waited. Because love, when broken, should never be rushed. It must be rebuilt one day, one act, one choice at a time. Those 6 months at the shelter changed everything. Not just for Achen, but for them. For the first time in their lives, the children saw what they had missed for years. Not just what Achen did, but who she truly was. Not a helper. Not a stranger. Not just the new wife, but a woman who had quietly given everything, without ever asking for anything in return. They watched her carry babies on her back while stirring a pot of porridge. They saw her sit for hours beside abused women, holding their hands and praying with them like she once did during their sick nights as children. They heard her whisper words of hope to lost girls, the same words she had once spoken to them when they were scared of the dark. Little by little, the bitterness faded. The guilt remained, but something stronger began to take root: gratitude. One afternoon, while sweeping the hallway, the eldest son paused and looked at her. He didn't say Achen. He simply said, "Mama, where do we put the broom?" She froze. He had never called her that before, not once. Later, the daughter knelt beside her during evening prayers and whispered, "Mama, you're stronger than I ever knew." And Liona, the one she once carried barefoot to the clinic, hugged her tightly one night and said, "Mama, I love you. I'm sorry it took me this long." Achen didn't cry in front of them. But alone in her small shelter room she wept, Not because of pain, but because the walls she had built around her heart were finally falling down. Slowly, gently, truthfully, love had finally found its way back, not through inheritance or blood, but through service, humility, and time. They came to the shelter as adults trying to fix what they broke as children, but they left as sons and daughters, not by name but by heart. And that's how stepmother became just mama. From step to real. On her 60th birthday, Achen expected nothing. She had grown used to quiet days and simple prayers. But that morning a car pulled up outside the shelter, and out came her 3 children, dressed in matching traditional attire, smiling nervously and holding balloons. "Mama," they said softly, "we have a surprise." They led her to the old community hall in Magoro. But when the doors opened, Achen gasped. The place had been transformed. Candles flickered, flowers lined the walls, and on a large banner above the stage were the words, "To Mama Achen, our light, our strength." The hall was full. Women from the shelter, children she had helped raise, neighbors from Mabera, even old church members, all had come to celebrate her. The food had been cooked with her favorite spices. Handmade decorations filled every corner, and old family photos she thought were long lost were printed on the walls. But what touched her most were the words. Each child stood up to speak. One talked about the time she sewed uniforms with a needle and thread. Another recalled the night she carried Liona through the rain. Their voices shook, and their eyes filled with tears. "We failed to see you," the eldest said, "but now we honor you." And this time, Achen didn't sit in the kitchen or hide behind the curtains. She sat at the head of the table in the seat of a queen, her heart full, her spirit seen, her name spoken with love. She was no longer invisible. She was Mama, and she was home.